Why did Sukuna's domain never have any barriers? Why did Kenjaku capture Gojo instead of trying to kill him? Here's a breakdown of all the binding vows in Jujutsu Kaisen. Nanami's overtime. Bro followed a salaryman schedule, and somehow that corporate suffering turned him into a monster. In Versus Mahito arc, when Nanami was investigating the deaths of the high schoolers, one thing led to another and he ended up in a fight with Mahito. Nanami initially had a slight edge, mostly because his curse technique was new and unique for Mahito, but soon the status changed. Nanami was on the back foot, while Mahito just played around with him. That's when Nanami looked at the time. His shift was over, and in that instant, the entire fight dynamic flipped. Nanami clocked in for overtime, and with it, his curse energy surged past its limits. His vow was absurdly simple: cap himself at 80% during work hours, then let loose 120% once the day was officially over. For anyone else, that'd be an arbitrary restriction. For Nanami, it was a corporate cheat code. As a grade 1 sorcerer, Nanami was already strong enough at 80% to handle most threats. Overtime wasn't just a boost, it was his built-in failsafe. The vow not only gave him power, it forced him to sharpen his technique with less. Revealing one's hand. This might be the dumbest binding vow in the series, or the smartest trick Gege ever pulled, because this was less a binding vow and more of a loophole the author made up to make it easy for himself. The first time we saw it is back in chapter 20, when Nanami and Yuji were fighting curses. Nanami calmly explained the mechanics of his ratio technique, while the enemy was standing right there listening. Yuji, being the only one with common sense, asked if that's really okay. Nanami answered with this so-called binding vow: if you give up the secrecy of your ability, you're rewarded with greater effectiveness. Later, Toji tries to explain himself mid-fight with Geto, but Geto just shuts him down with, "Yeah, I already saw through that." Then you get Sukuna in chapter 115, literally clowning on Jogo by saying out loud that he won't take advantage of this loophole. In the end, this so-called vow feels less like a universal law of Jujutsu and more like a shonen tradition. The "let me narrate my power for the audience" clause. Did it actually make characters stronger? Sometimes. Did it make fights easier to follow? Absolutely. That wasn't a vow between sorcerers. It was a binding vow between Gege and us. Miwa's sacrifice. This vow made me question if Miwa was secretly sabotaging her own team, or if she just pulled the single worst trade deal in Jujutsu Kaisen history. During the Shibuya incident, Kenjaku, in Geto's body, stalled Yuji with his usual villain monologue, flexing about maximum techniques instead of just deleting him on the spot. That's when Kyoto students jumped in, hoping to catch him off guard. Miwa, knowing she couldn't survive a prolonged fight against a monster like Geto, gambled everything on one decisive strike. Her vow was brutal: give up the ability to ever use her katana in exchange for landing a single all-or-nothing blow. A fair trade, except her attack did absolutely nothing, but the consequences stuck. By chapter 244, when the sorcerers were planning their final stand against Sukuna, Miwa was outright excluded. Not because she lacked courage, but she had literally nerfed herself out of relevance. That's why some fans joke that Miwa low-key won JJK. While others died horrific deaths in Shinjuku, she was sitting on the bench because of her own vow. And if she somehow planned that from the start, then maybe Miwa wasn't a tragic side character after all, but a mastermind. Sukuna and Yuji's pact. This wasn't just a binding vow, it was the legal paperwork that guaranteed Yuji a seat in the final battle. Back in the fearsome womb arc, Yuji actually died. Everyone mourned except Sukuna, who dragged Yuji's soul into his innate domain and slapped a contract on the table. Yuji resisted, but dead men don't have much bargaining power. Eventually, he agreed. The deal had just two conditions. 1. Sukuna could seize Yuji's body for exactly 1 minute, during which he couldn't harm anyone. 2. Yuji would forget the pact ever happened. A clean setup for Sukuna and a loaded trap for Yuji. And of course, Sukuna, being Sukuna, honored the words, but not the spirit. In chapter 212, right in the middle of the culling game, Sukuna invoked Enchain, hijacked Yuji's body, and exploited the loophole, tearing off one of Yuji's own fingers, because apparently self-mutilation wasn't covered under the no-harm clause. He forced Mei Mei to swallow the finger, transferring himself into his new host. That one loophole led directly to Sukuna vs Gojo, and later Yuji finally squaring off against Sukuna himself. Hakari's immortality jackpot. After joining Yuji's squad to rewrite the rules of the culling game, Hakari found himself squaring off against Hajime Kashimo, a reincarnated 400-year-old sorcerer with enough bloodlust to nuke an entire stadium. The clash was brutal, and Hakari needed more than just guts to survive. He activated his domain expansion, Idle, Death, Gamble, a pachinko machine from hell. The moment Hakari hit the lucky spin, his binding vow triggered. For exactly 4 minutes and 11 seconds, Hakari became immortal. No matter how much damage he took, his regeneration rewound him back to life. Hakari's arm-severing vow. This was basically bro's health insurance policy. And crazy enough, he didn't get screwed by the fine print. Once Hakari hit his immortality jackpot, Kashimo realized he couldn't win just by trading blows. Every slash, every blast, Hakari shrugged it off like a respawning video game character. So Kashimo went nuclear. He supercharged seawater with electrified curse energy and detonated it into a steam explosion big enough to vaporize Hakari completely. But Hakari improvised mid-death. In the middle of the blast, he struck a binding vow. Give up his right arm in exchange for enough curse energy to shield the rest of his body. The arm evaporated instantly, but his core stayed intact. It was reckless, brilliant, and absolutely unfair. The surge of energy let Hakari tank Kashimo's deadliest move, push back, and ultimately claim victory. He even walked away with Kashimo's respect, plus the man's points. Mahito's final form. Imagine getting slapped around by Black Flash so hard that you evolve, and somehow downgrade at the same time. That's Mahito's final form in a nutshell. During the Shibuya incident, Yuji and Todo teamed up to beat Mahito like a practice dummy. After eating consecutive Black Flashes, Mahito suddenly had his revelation. That's when his body underwent its big transformation. Gone was the human facade, replaced by a so-called instant spirit body of distorted killing. His offense skyrocketed, his defense hardened, and he even imposed a binding vow on himself. No more shapeshifting, no more alternate forms, just raw, concentrated Mahito. On paper, that should have made him unstoppable. In reality, the real cost wasn't his flexibility, it was his IQ. Post-transformation, Mahito went from cunning manipulator to brainless bruiser. Instead of strategy, he tried to bait Yuji with a half-baked trap, literally leaving his back wide open. And that's how the self-proclaimed pinnacle of cursed evolution got folded. Which raises the question, was this really a glow-up or a glow-down? Sukuna's domain range restrictions. So what do we get when an author decides to make two unbeatable characters, but he has to kill one? You get in a fight in the middle of a long-ass fantasy science lecture. After the culling games, fans got the showdown everyone was waiting for. Gojo versus Sukuna. The two strongest sorcerers clashing head-on, their blows shaking the entire battlefield, while the bystanders struggled to even understand what they were watching. Naturally, it escalated into domain spam. Gojo's unlimited void versus Sukuna's malevolent shrine. And the burning question everyone had was so simple. How the hell was Sukuna supposed to counter Gojo's infinity hacks? Sukuna re-engineered his domain by shrinking its range and even giving up its sure hit effect. In exchange, he cranked up its raw destructive output to the point where it shattered Gojo's unlimited void. So yes, Sukuna technically won the clash. It wasn't just Malevolent Shrine, it was Malevolent Shrine Limited Edition. Toji's physical enhancement. This binding vow is a curse and a blessing at the same time, and this is kind of the reason there's a balance in the Jujutsu world. We first met him in chapter 66, during Gojo's past arc. From the moment he appeared, Toji was just another villain. He was the cool anti-hero you hated to love, hired to assassinate the Star Plasma vessel. He didn't just succeed, he embarrassed the Jujutsu world by taking down its two prodigies, Gojo and Geto. That feat alone stamped his name as one of the deadliest humans in the series. The secret to his absurd track record was his heavenly restriction, a natural binding vow that robbed him of his curse energy completely. Not a drop. Even an average civilian, or heck, probably a side character from another series, had more cursed energy than Toji. But the trade-off was monstrous. With no cursed energy clogging his body, all of his natural abilities were pushed to their absolute peak. His senses sharpened beyond human limits, his body became a weapon, and he developed a natural resistance to curses. He was so fast, so strong, and so instinct-driven that he could fight Gojo, a legend, a man with infinite cursed energy, on equal ground through pure physicality alone. And yet the Zenin clan kicked him to the curb for lacking cursed energy. How about lacking brain power, Zenin clan? So Toji embraced the role they forced on him, an assassin feared across the world, earning the name Sorcerer Killer. What makes it poetic is how he became Gojo's mirror image. Gojo represented infinity, limitless curse energy, boundless perception, untouchable arrogance. Toji was the void, no cursed energy, sharpened instincts, cold precision. They were the two extremes, the yin and the yang, that balanced the entire system of Jujutsu. And his restriction was so absolute, it transcended even death. When Granny Ogami tried to resurrect him using her seance technique, he broke free of her control. With no cursed energy to burn out, Toji rampaged longer than any spirit should have, turning a summoning ritual into a massacre. Maki's physical enhancement. From the start, Maki looked like she drew the short straw. Almost no cursed energy, no cursed techniques, not even the ability to see curses without special glasses. What she got in return was enhanced physical ability. Better than a normal sorcerer, but nothing compared to monsters like Gojo or Toji. That was thanks to her heavenly restriction. Like Toji, she was born with a binding vow that traded cursed energy for physical ability, but hers was weaker. There was also a theory that said since she was twins with Mei, the heavenly restriction nerfed Maki, and in return increased Mei's super talent. Then came in Mei's sacrifice. By giving up her life, Mei passed everything she had into Maki. In that moment, Maki's restriction fully bloomed. Her cursed energy vanished completely, and she transformed into a true Toji parallel. No cursed energy at all, but physical stats so absurd they could rival even Gojo. And here's where the backup plan theory really kicked in. Gojo always talked about wiping out the conservative faction of the Jujutsu world, but thanks to the direction of the plot, he never got the chance. Instead, Maki carried out that bloody purge herself. And the much teased idea of Toji versus Sukuna, we never saw it, but Maki gave us a glimpse by becoming Toji 2.0 and taking on monsters above her weight class. In the end, Maki wasn't just her own character, she was Gege's safety net. When promises couldn't be delivered through Gojo or Toji, Maki stepped in. And that's why her heavenly restriction wasn't just a curse or a blessing, it was the author's insurance policy. Mechamaru's cursed energy amplification. If there was one binding vow that triggered a butterfly effect big enough to doom half the cast, it was this one. At first he seemed nothing more than Kyoto High's puppet master, but it wasn't until chapter 38 that we saw the truth of Kokichi Muta's condition. His heavenly restriction shattered his body from birth. His right arm was useless, both legs were paralyzed below the knee, and he had no sensation from the waist down. Even worse, his skin was super sensitive. Moonlight could burn him, and every pore felt like a needle stabbing into his flesh. His entire existence was pain. And what did he get in return? Rage. His cursed energy amplified so massively that he could control his puppets all over the country at the same time. A powerful ability, yes, but not nearly enough to justify the suffering. So when Mahito dangled hope in front of him, Mechamaru broke. He struck a deal, handing over intel on Jujutsu High in exchange for the chance to heal his body. The betrayal set the dominoes in motion. The Shibuya incident, the chaos that followed, and the brutal deaths of Nanami, Nobara, and countless others. Mahito and Mechamaru's deal, the simplest and the most direct binding vow in the whole series that we all knew was not going to end well for anyone involved. In chapter 79, we had a pretty big reveal about Mechamaru being the rat. He cut a deal with Mahito. Mahito would get classified info about the Jujutsu High, and Mechamaru would get a properly functioning body in return. It was a pretty straightforward deal, and just like he was promised, Mechamaru got a new body. What both parties had in mind truly came out when the deal was completed. Mechamaru brought out his best puppets and tried to kill Mahito. He never really wanted to completely betray the Jujutsu High. He wanted to kill Mahito and even Pseudo Geto as compensation for his betrayal, but he clearly overestimated himself. He really overestimated himself. Mahito just bodied him. He did have a bit of a hard time, but that's about it. The only saving grace was his plan to use fail-safe puppets that gave intel to Yuji and the gang. Yuji's execution order, the biggest jump scare of Jujutsu Kaisen. After the Shibuya incident, when Gojo got sealed in the prison realm, the conservative elders of the Jujutsu Society got their wings and fangs back. The same people who were shivering like kittens when Gojo was around started making some big moves. One of the biggest of them all was to execute Yuji Todori, and they gave that contract to the one guy who was supposed to be the second strongest after Gojo, Yuta Okotsu. And to gain their trust and some operational freedom, Yuta made a binding vow with the higher-ups that he would definitely kill Yuji. Yuta acted on that deal and actually killed Yuji. We even saw him drag Yuji's lifeless corpse away, fulfilling his end of the deal to execute Yuji publicly. But only later did we see that he healed Yuji with the reverse curse technique and revived him. World-cutting dismantle restrictions. With just one vow, Sukuna showed everyone that he's not just overpowered, but strategic as hell. In his clash with Gojo, Jujutsu Kaisen gave us one of the most iconic duels in anime history. It wasn't just raw power, it was two geniuses bending the rules of their own techniques in real time. For Sukuna, his ace was dismantle, a slash so lethal it could carve the world itself. Normally activating world-cutting dismantle required a long setup. With his Enma hand sign, against most opponents that was fine, but against Gojo, even a single delay meant death. So Sukuna forged a binding vow. The deal was straightforward. In exchange for the ability to fire dismantle instantly during the Gojo fight, he permanently handicapped himself afterward. From then on, dismantle would require extra hand signs and a longer cast time, a permanent tax on his own ability. On paper, it looks like a steep price. But here's the thing, how many fighters in the world could actually push Sukuna like Gojo did? For Sukuna, the trade was worth it. Sacrifice convenience forever to win the one battle that actually mattered. Later, fighters like Maki and Kashimo managed to dodge the slower dismantle, proof that the nerf was real. Sukuna's open barrier domain. Sukuna's arrogance wasn't just in his words, it was built into his domain expansion. Malevolent Shrine wasn't just power, it was arrogance turned into architecture. Most domains in Jujutsu Kaisen follow the same template. A sealed barrier, a closed space, under the caster's absolute control. Even Gojo's Infinite Void had walls, a defined shape and boundaries. Sukuna, he didn't bother. His domain had no barrier at all. On paper that meant one thing. You could actually run away. If you were caught in Malevolent Shrine, the door was wide open. Just leave. But almost no one made it out alive. Because what Sukuna gained by dropping the barrier was worth far more. Guaranteed hits on every target within a massive 200-meter radius. A slaughterhouse the size of a city block. The result was terrifying. The moment the shrine appeared, the area became guaranteed death zone. Curses, sorcerers, civilians, it didn't matter. If you were inside, you were already being sliced apart before you could blink, let alone escape. At first it seemed like Sukuna was just flexing, showing off that he didn't need the safety of walls. But in truth, he had optimized his domain to the most oppressive one in the series. Open, limitless, and still inescapable. Sukuna's improvised binding vow. This one's not even a smart move or a strategy anymore. It's straight up cheat code and plot armor. During the Gojo vs Sukuna clash, domains were colliding so violently it felt like the manga itself was melting. Every unlimited void, every malevolent shrine, every black flash, they weren't just hurting each other's bodies, they were frying each other's brains. And in JJK, brain damage has a clear price. If certain areas of your brain are wrecked, you can't use curse techniques or domains until they're healed. For anyone else that would mean downtime. But Sukuna, he found a loophole. When Unlimited Void scrambled parts of his brain, he simply switched tracks. He rerouted to different regions of his mind, rewired his hand signs, and on the spot crafted an improvised binding vow. The result? Malevolent Shrine activated at full effectiveness and range, even when the laws of the system said it shouldn't have been possible. Basically, Sukuna hacked his own biology. The fight didn't just prove he was strong, it proved he could bend the entire power system around his will. Mei Mei and Ui didn't just redefine sibling loyalty, they cranked it up to an almost disturbing extreme. Their bond was so absolute it became a binding vow. During the Shibuya incident, the siblings faced off against the smallpox deity. Inside its domain, both were immediately pushed on the back foot. The curse's grave attack was a death sentence, and while Mei Mei carried most of the fight, even she was running out of options. When the smallpox deity unleashed the grave again, aiming to finish her for good, Mei Mei revealed the ace up her sleeve, her vow with Ui. By their pact, Ui lived with his cursed energy suppressed at all times, only allowed to release it when Mei Mei asked him the ultimate question, "Will you die for me?" And every time Ui's answer was yes, in that moment, Ui's energy surged forward while Mei Mei deliberately suppressed her own. The grave locked onto Ui, sparing Mei Mei, and with the curse's attention diverted, Mei Mei struck the decisive blow, obliterating the smallpox deity. It was both brilliant and chilling. It was a vow rooted in a disturbingly absolute devotion between brother and sister. If most vows in JJK are clever, desperate, or tragic, this one stood out for being effective, unsettling, and way too on brand for these two. SysCon wasn't just a meme, it was their power system. Mei Mei's Bird Strike, the ultimate pay-to-win model of JJK. Her innate ability, Blackbird Manipulation, gave her control over flocks of crows, turning them into scouts and weapons. But during her fight against the smallpox deity, her birds were locked outside the domain. Only a single crow remained inside. With her options running thin, Mei Mei pulled out her extension technique, Bird Strike. The mechanic was brutal. The crow itself would form a binding vow, sacrificing its life in exchange for a surge of cursed energy. That single bird became a one-time missile, carrying enough force to drop even a special grade curse. And it worked. While Ui absorbed the graves of tension, Mei Mei directed the lone crow to trigger the vow. The bird's kamikaze strike hit the deity from behind, exorcising it instantly. Mei Mei even boasted afterward that outside of Gojo, no one could withstand a bird strike. Of course, that flexed didn't age well. Against monsters like Kenjaku and Sukuna, a bird strike got stonewalled. But that almost proves the point. Outside of the absolute top tier freaks of the verse, Mei Mei's pay-to-win ability could delete nearly anyone. The Hakari Kashimo agreement. Sometimes boys bond best trying to kill each other. And that's exactly how Hakari and Kashimo forged one of the weirdest friendships in JJK. Kashimo is one of Kenjaku's resurrected ancient sorcerers. A 1,000-year-old warrior with a single obsession. Fight Sukuna at full power. Nothing else mattered. Meanwhile, Hakari had a different goal. He wanted Kashimo's points to help rewrite the culling game rules. The two clashed. Their battle was brutal. Hakari gambling his life with idle death gamble while Kashimo unleashed his lightning fury. And yet after nearly destroying each other, they ended the fight with mutual respect. Instead of bad blood, they walked away with a deal. Kashimo handed over his points, and Hakari promised to make sure Kashimo got his one-on-one with Sukuna. And Hakari actually delivered. In chapter 237, when Urame tried to interfere in the Sukuna vs Kashimo showdown, Hakari stepped in. He trapped Urame in his domain. Sure, Urame's ice block still dropped, but all it did was hand Sukuna a free weapon, which Hakari didn't seem bothered about in the slightest. Two guys fought to the brink of death, then fist bumped through an unspoken bro code. Hakari risked a 1,000-year-old curse user's wrath just to keep his word. That's boy friendship, JJK style. Yorozu's marriage vow. As far as crazy girlfriends are concerned, Sukuna beat everyone else by a landslide. Except for my ex, of course. Yorozu was an ancient Heian-era curse user. While everyone else trembled at the sight of Sukuna, she fell in love with him instantly. And Yorozu wasn't shy about it. She was a free spirit who rejected conventions, even clothing, centuries before my body, my choice was even a thing. Her love, though, was just pure obsession. Yorozu convinced herself that Sukuna's greatest curse was his loneliness, and she decided the only way to save him was to kill him. That didn't work out, really, but the obsession doesn't fade. So when she was reincarnated, in modern times, she seized Sumiki's body and charged straight back at Sukuna. Her condition was simple and insane. If she won the fight, she would marry him. But Yorozu's idea of a wedding looked more like a horror festival. 3 villages massacred, the heads of the most handsome men turned into a decorative shuriken, and a banquet of monkey brain soups for the guests. Of course, Yorozu never stood a chance. Sukuna wasn't looking for love, and Yorozu wasn't offering it, just obsession wrapped in bloodlust. But in her vow, she gave us the most unhinged mix of romance and carnage. Kenjaku's ancient vows. This vow was a direct proof on how much Kenjaku liked chaos and hated humanity. Centuries before the culling game even began, Kenjaku laid the groundwork. He made pacts with Jujutsu sorcerers and cursed spirits, promising them revival in the modern age. For warriors who craved blood and curses who craved carnage, the offer was irresistible. They agreed, binding their futures to Kenjaku's scheme. Here's a twist. When Kenjaku took over Geto's body, those vows technically should have been void. He wasn't the same person anymore, not in any way that mattered to the binding law. He didn't have to keep those vows, but he did anyway, not out of honor, but to unleash centuries of monsters into modern society, because that was the purest way to tear humanity apart. He chose to keep promises he didn't have to keep, simply because keeping them guaranteed maximum chaos. That's Kenjaku in a nutshell. Every vow, every scheme, every body he stole, it all served the same endgame. Todo's enhanced Boogie Woogie. The only time getting handicapped was an actual upgrade. Boogie Woogie was already one of the Flash's innate techniques in the series. With a single slap, Todo could swap positions with allies or enemies, turning the battlefield into his personal dance floor. But during his brutal fight with Mahito, he lost his left arm, and with it, his ability to clap. Boogie Woogie should have died there. Instead, Todo upgraded it. He replaced his arm with a prosthetic embedded with a vibra slap, a percussion instrument that produces rattling vibrations. Then through a binding vow, he re-engineered his technique. Instead of relying on claps, he tied Boogie Woogie's activation to the number of vibrations. He gave up simplicity, but gained range and multi-target swaps far beyond his original limits. The result was insane. Todo could now perform nearly 50 swaps per second, shuffling multiple enemies and enemies across wide distances with surgical precision. His vow transformed him from a flashy fighter into one of the best support sorcerers in JJK. With Okotsu's help, Todo used his enhanced Boogie Woogie inside Sukuna's malevolent shrine to swap teammates out of danger. Todo turned a crippling loss into his ultimate flex. Yuji's soul targeting dismantle. With this one trick, Yuji did something even Gojo couldn't pull off. By the time Gojo vs Sukuna, the king was stacking hacks like patch notes. He improvised binding vows to bypass brain damage, rewired his body on the fly, and weaponized his barrierless domain to shred infinity itself. Physics, narrative consistency, Sukuna bent both like wet paper. But once Gojo fell, it was Yuji's turn to step up. And for the first time, he answered Sukuna's rule-breaking with a cheat of his own. To protect Mei Mei and make sure Sukuna alone was erased, Yuji borrowed Sukuna's signature technique, dismantle. Through a binding vow, Yuji concentrated on the attack. His cut sliced through the boundary between Sukuna's soul and Mei Mei's soul. In the physical world, the damage was almost nothing. No blood, no scars. But on the spiritual level, it was everything. Their souls were severed, separating Mei Mei's existence from Sukuna's control. It was poetic justice. The move Sukuna had abused to butcher countless enemies became the very blade Yuji used to pry Mei Mei free. Sukuna taught everyone how unfair binding vows could be. Yuji just taught him what it feels like to be the one on the receiving end. Higuruma's Executioner's Sword. If there's a better candidate than Yuji to be an MC of the story, then Higuruma was him. Higuruma was one of the guys picked by Kenjaku in the Culling Games. Dude was such a genius, he became a grade 1 sorcerer at record speed. He mastered his domain expansion almost instantly. His Shikigami Judge Man served as an impartial judge, weighing the opponent's guilt. If the verdict was guilty, the gavel transformed into the Executioner's Sword, a weapon with nearly 100% success rate at killing its target in a single slash. No fancy counters, no flashy clashes, just judgment, followed by inevitable execution. Higuruma even used it against Yuji, nearly killing him twice. Now imagine if he were the protagonist. Every arc wouldn't just be about fighting, it would be about judgment. Every villain from Mahito to Sukuna to Kenjaku would be dragged into his court. Each battle would double as a trial, spilling secrets and exposing truths through the domain's mechanics. And while Yuji's story is about carrying burdens, Higuruma's would have been about deciding who deserves to keep living in a cursed world. Simple domain restrictions. This binding vow was the author's way of protecting his plot and logic. Domain expansion is the ultimate trump card. Once activated, the opponent is sealed inside and the caster's technique becomes guaranteed to hit. In most cases, that's basically game over, which is why Gege had to invent a counter, the simple domain. It created a miniature barrier around the user, a pocket-sized domain that cancelled out the guaranteed hit effect of larger domains. It was brilliant. In practice, if everyone and their grandma had access to it, domain battles would have lost all stakes. So the new Shadow-style elders threw in a catch. They restricted who could learn it, passing the technique only to select disciples, and forcing them into a binding vow not to spread it further. The vow wasn't about honor, it was damage control, ensuring the move stayed rare. Of course, prodigies like Mechamaru managed to copy it anyway just by observation. Now, it was gatekept for a good reason. Imagine Sukuna vs Gojo. If every fighter had it, half the fight would have been two dudes flicking simple domains on and off like Wi-Fi routers. No brain damage, no broken barriers, no limitless versus shrine tension. The vow didn't just restrict sorcerers, it restricted the audience from getting bored. and that makes it less of a power system rule and more of a narrative safety net. Proof that sometimes even Gege has to nerf his own universe. Kenjaku's Game Master restrictions. Say what you want, Kenjaku was the fairest of them all, and he proved it with this vow. At around chapter 136 to 137, we get some details about the culling game setup. Kenjaku revealed that he was the Game Master, but even he was not exempt from the rules of it. Later in chapter 146 and 147, Tengen explained the rules of the game. Players could add new rules, and Game Master Kenjaku had to implement them, as long as they didn't disrupt the fundamental structure of the game. His binding vow made sure the game wasn't just his toy, it was an iron system that even its creator couldn't fully control. The purpose behind it was chilling. The game itself was tied to the Tengen merger ritual, which couldn't be stopped until the game ended, and the game wouldn't end until every player either died or left. By chapters 158 to 160, Kenjaku openly admitted it. He couldn't halt the game. He couldn't rewrite it on a whim. He could only enforce it just like everyone else. On the surface that looked like fairness. In reality, it was his most sadistic play. He built a cage so airtight that even he had to live inside it, because he knew no one else would survive long enough to use that against him. Six Eyes Fate Connection. This was the strongest, most persistent binding vow in the entire series. The vow was so absolute that without it, Jujutsu Kaisen itself wouldn't exist. In chapter 145, Tengen revealed the ancient system that bound fate together. The star plasma vessel, the Six Eyes and Tengen himself were linked in a cycle of inevitability. The vessel stabilized Tengen through the merger, and the Six Eyes were destined to guard the vessel, ensuring the ritual could always succeed. Kenjaku knew this all too well. Across history, he fought the Six Eyes more than once. And even when he managed to kill them, another was born before the merger day arrived. Fate corrected itself. The cycle refused to break. We saw this pattern again in the hidden inventory arc. Gojo, the latest Six Eyes, was tasked with guarding the star plasma vessel, but Toji barged in and shattered the balance. The vessel was lost, the merger failed, and Tengen was forced into evolution, an event that weakened the very barriers protecting humanity. If the cycle had been broken earlier, if Kenjaku had ever succeeded, consequences would have been unthinkable. The culling game might have never existed, the sorcerer world might have collapsed, and the characters we follow today might never have been born in the same form, if at all. Barrier consent system. The manifestation of no means no, but no backsies once you say yes. When Kenjaku created the culling game barriers, he built them with ironclad restrictions, but tucked inside was one rule that looked, at first glance, like mercy: the consent system. For civilians trapped inside, the barrier gave a single opportunity to walk away. The binding vow allowed them to reject the game and escape, but only once. If they refused, that door slammed shut. They were trapped inside until the game ended. No exceptions. The same rule applied to sorcerers on the outside. When they approached a colony, the barrier manifested, introduced itself, and asked if they wished to join. If they said no, they were spared. If they said yes, they became players on the spot, locked into the culling game until death or survival. It was a binding vow built on consent, but twisted into a trap. You had freedom for a moment, but once you made a choice, there were no backsies. And in Kenjaku's system, choice was just another way of making sure everyone ended up where he wanted them. The human trafficker's child capturing barrier could have been one of the most logical ways to keep civilians out of Jujutsu business. We saw this in the first chapter of JJK Modulo. When Tsurugi and Yuka were handling a child trafficking case, they came across a barrier. Basically, the barrier had a way to manipulate the people's mind a bit and made them choose a specific path, and anyone with low curse energy or no curse energy were its targets. Once these targets took the path, the barrier would activate and capture them, and the payoff was the cursed tools, or the sorcerers wouldn't be able to enter it, at least not without using force. If you think about it, this could be a perfect technique to keep the normal civilians away when a fight between curse users happens. Like a misdirection could just simply send people in a different way, without seeing or experiencing anything. But I guess it could work for child trafficking as well, to each their own. Yorozu's love token. If your girlfriend ain't gifting you like Yorozu, was she even your girlfriend? After her desperate fight with Sukuna, Yorozu failed to do what she wanted most: kill him and get his recognition. Even in the end, Sukuna didn't take her seriously. He never needed Malevolent Shrine, never treated her as an equal, just another obstacle, brushed aside. But Yorozu's obsession wasn't built on logic. In her final moments, she smiled, convinced Sukuna truly understood her, and with that delusional happiness, she unleashed one last act: a binding vow fused with her curse technique. She poured her entire being into constructing her final creation, Kamutoke, a weapon Sukuna had once wielded 1,000 years ago. It wasn't just a copy, it was Yorozu's soul condensed into steel, her obsession reforged as a gift, and Sukuna accepted it. He first drew Kamutoke in his battle with Hajime Kashimo, its electrifying properties making him deadlier than ever. Yorozu died believing she'd finally connected with Sukuna. In reality, her last act only armed him further, turning her love into another weapon for the man who would never love her back. The ultimate love token, deadly, unforgettable, and one-sided. And how do you think Kamutoke, the love token, compares with the other cursed weapons and tools in Jujutsu Kaisen?